Hello and welcome. We are starting with the latest from South Africa. The country's ties with the US continue to deteriorate. In the latest development, the Trump administration has denied a diplomatic visa to President Cyril Ramaphosa's special envoy to the US. The Trump administration allegedly refused to recognize Mcebisi Jonas as South Africa's official interlocutor. The visa was denied in May this year. But the revelation was recently made by the Democratic Alliance Party, or the DA. It is the second biggest party in Ramaphosa's coalition government after his African National Congress, or the ANC. After the DA's claim, the president's office accused the party of spreading disinformation. The government said that the DA is sensationalizing the matter. It added that special envoys do not present diplomatic credentials to host countries. According to reports, the denial of a diplomatic visa is not a surprising move. The Trump administration had reportedly sought the appointment of an alternative envoy, and despite repeated communications, Jonas remained the president's special envoy to the US. Jonas was appointed to improve relations with the US, but he has called the Trump a racist and a narcissist right-winger in the past. Shortly after his appointment in April, his controversial remarks against President Trump resurfaced. Now, this raised serious questions about his suitability for the role. Experts believe that rejection of a diplomatic visa is also in line with the Trump administration's strategy to give South Africa the cold shoulder, since this is not a standalone incident. It is a part of a series of steps taken by the US to isolate South Africa. In the most recent development, the US boycotted the G20 summit, currently chaired by Ramaphosa. The US Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, skipped the G20 finance ministers' meeting. Instead, he sent a lower-ranking official. Bessent skipped a similar meeting in February as well. The U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio dodged a meeting of G20 foreign ministers, adding that he could not coddle anti-Americanism. The cold shoulder strategy is not restricted to not sending American officials. It was also visible during Africa Summit in Washington. The Trump administration invited leaders from smaller nations like Liberia, Senegal, Gabon, Mauritania, and Guinea-Bissau. But the leader of Africa's largest economy was snubbed at the summit. In May, Ramaphosa hoped to rekindle ties with the U.S. with his Washington visit. Trump had invited him to the Oval Office, but he ambushed him with accusations of white genocide. Trump also showed Ramaphosa a video to back his claims, which later turned out to be false. He alleged that there were mass burial sites of whites in South Africa. The video, however, had doctored images from different African countries, including the DRC. Now, President Donald Trump was also miffed with Ramaphosa for bringing a genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice, and the country's renewed ties with Iran anguished him further. Trump's ire is not restricted to diplomatic blockades. There are economic consequences too. Trump threatened to impose 30% tariffs on South African goods from the 1st of August. Now, South Africa's central bank warned that if the U.S. tariffs come into effect, it could lead to around 100,000 job losses. The figures are extremely worrying for a nation with an unemployment rate of close to 33%. This is also a cause of concern as the U.S. is South Africa's second biggest trading partner after China. Ramaphosa has pinned his hopes on his special envoy Jonas to mend ties with the U.S. But with his contentious views on the U.S. president and absence of a South African ambassador in the U.S., the path to better ties seems difficult. Now, for more on this, I'm being joined by Patrick Bond, who is a political economist from Johannesburg. Thank you for being with us, Patrick.
Well, thanks very much for having me, Alison.
Now, what are the key factors driving the recent strain in diplomatic relations between the US and South Africa? particularly
Well,
the rejection of President Ramaphosa's special envoy by the US government?
well, your intro said really all of them, except one, which is that the BRICS met just a week and a half ago, and Donald Trump took that opportunity to sort of steal the limelight by saying, if you dare do anything anti-American, well, we hit you with 10% extra tariffs. And his particular concern was the potential for alternative financial routing systems. And ironically, that's actually something under discussion today, there where you are in Durban, where the G20 finance ministers and central bank leadership, including there is a higher level from the US, Jerome Powell, the chair of the Fed. But as you pointed out, Scott Bessent isn't there, even though the US is meant to take over the G20. And the particular question of Mcebisi Jonas, who was set to be the special envoy to go and calm nerves. He's a very talented former deputy finance minister who's also head of MTN, that's Africa's largest cell phone network. But in addition to his 2020 allegations that Donald Trump is racist and homophobic and a narcissist, all of the things you've mentioned, which were done in a sort of independent activist spirit. But what then he did was in running MTN, got into trouble. In fact, the trouble dates to his predecessor, Cyril Ramaphosa, who was the chair in the early 2000s. And that was the Turkcell, that is Turkey's main private company, contest over Iran's contract. And because it's Iran, of course, a lot of questions, and there is some evidence that the South Africans may have bribed Iran. And one top diplomat, the ambassador from South Africa to Iran, was fired. Secondly, that MTN is in the courts in the US also for supporting the Taliban in Afghanistan by turning on and off the MTN network there at a time when US soldiers were being killed. And so there are families of those soldiers suing MTN. You can see what a mess it is that, unfortunately, Mcebisi Jonas may not have been the right person. And then you might say, well, would it have been better to have a white South African? And probably from Donald Trump, and especially Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. The answer to that is yes.
Right. And how significant is the US decision to skip the high-level events such as the G20 summit in South Africa and the Africa summit in Washington? And what message does this send to Pretoria and the broader continent?
You know, I think last week's meeting of the 5 West African coastal nations partly had the geopolitics. There was obviously minerals, so it wasn't necessarily attempting to be an Africa-wide event like Joe Biden had hosted, Barack Obama had hosted. Instead, I think what we're looking at in the, let's say, G20 positioning is that Trump doesn't really care much about the rest of the world and what they think. And the opportunity to take over the G20 and keep some of the programs and the momentum, such as debt relief for Africa or climate finance or taxing the rich, the kind of programs that Lula Ignacio da Silva, the Brazilian president, have passed to Cyril Ramaphosa this year. And indeed that you could even trace to Delhi, where Narendra Modi had started, for example, allowing the African Union to be a member and reforming the G20. That's all gone. And I don't think, they're describing what's happening now as a G20 -1 on all of these crucial issues. And it means that the finance ministers meeting in Durban, the headline today is really just that they're trying to lubricate international finance. That's the opposite of de-dollarization, of course, rather than setting up an alternative system against the dollar. I think there's a general spirit of fear among these top financiers that maybe Donald Trump will do something really crazy, as he's been doing with the world economy on trade.
Right. And how will this growing rift between the two countries impact economic cooperation, trade agreements, or South Africa's standing in global alliances like BRICS and with AGOA?
So not only did the 10% extra tariff for being a member of BRICS hit South Africa last week, also a 30% general tariff. And that's on top of the existing 50% on steel and aluminium, and there's a 25% on cars. So we're looking at a real decline, 87% decline in auto sales over the past 3 months from South Africa to the US is just one example of the destruction. So the AGOA, Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, 0% access. That's history. It was going to expire in September anyhow. And so Trump is using this leverage, and he's doing really, really brutal tariffs on everyone. I think the destruction of world trade and global value chains and the chaos and the price inflation that's going to be transmitted to US consumers will make these months of trade negotiations look ultimately like the ultimate act of self-harm. So what we call a Smoot-Hawley tradition, that is the US going protectionist, and that in the 1930s is what catalyzed the Great Depression. And I think that's, make America great depression again, maybe the what we really remember Trump for. As for the trade deals that were proposed, you'll recall in May 21, in addition to offering a game of golf with Ernie Els and Retief Goosen and Gary Player in the background, they're sort of white South African golfing stars who's very friendly with Trump. Nothing really has stuck, including offers to buy oil and gas. So it looks like a dud. And my own view is that there's really no space for the US in the G20. They should, have a vote him off the island and maybe give next year's G19 meeting to Mexico instead.
Right. Patrick, as always, great to have you on the show. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
First Post now available in 9 languages on YouTube. English,
at $36 trillion.
French,
Le FMI, comme
German,
Geschäftsführenden Direktor,
Hindi,
$30 trillion ka-charge mo.
Indonesian,
Pemerintah tanpa pemeriksaan.
Italian,
Skali radikali.
Japanese,
$1 trilhão idioma.
Portuguese,
Por causa do próprio balanço patrimonial.
Spanish.
Beautiful bill.
Go to Settings, click on Audio Track and select a language of your choice. Be the first to know what's happening around you in your first language. First Post.